From SEC Media Days in Nashville, Tennessee, it is Chris Low. You know him well, ESPN senior writer. He covered Tennessee for a number of years, continues to break stories for Tennessee and throughout the SEC. Chris, I appreciate the time. How are you?
Good, Dave. It's good to be with you, man. It's quite an event here. It gets bigger every year, it seems like, doesn't it?
It does. A little bit bigger than it was like five guys covering a Tennessee football practice. You, me, Brent, and that was I'm trying to remember somebody from the Chattanooga Times.
Andy Staples was there for a while, yeah.
Yeah, we watched a lot of football, of which we probably got like 2% of knowledge out of it.
Well, that's back when you could actually watch practice. You know, when you could go to practice and watch it.
Yeah.
I know that seems like archaic now. No coach lets you go to watch football practice. But, you know, in the late 90s, early 2000s, you could actually go to watch practice. And you got a little bit of a feel for the team. Those days are long gone.
Yep, they are. I feel like Tennessee got a pretty good deal out of the NCAA investigation. I thought the judgment was fair, and I didn't think Tennessee deserved a postseason ban. What did you think about it?
Well, I guess it depends on the way you look at it. If you look at it from other schools in the last few years that got postseason bans, Oklahoma State in basketball. I mean, you go back to Ohio State, they got skewered pretty good for selling tattoos. You know, apparel for tattoos, parlors. I thought what Tennessee did today is going to be the model for the way schools handle these things going forward. Is they're going to try to jump on it quick. They're going to have the chancellor, the present chancellor on down, really sort of take a hold of this, bring in a firm like Tennessee did, be willing to pay a ton of money in legal fees, a ton of money in fees to the NCAA, and just basically say, you know what, we didn't know anything about it. This was not on our watch. We've got everybody, coaches, players, staff members who are part of this and the NCAA's mercy. And this is a different NCAA now than there was 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago. There's a trend, a movement within the organization not to punish schools and players, not a part of the violations. And when you look at the current Tennessee players, there's really nobody on there, certainly not the coaching staff, that was a part of it. But I do understand how, if you're another school, certainly one that has the NCAA's wrath, and you're seeing 200 infractions and 18 level 1 violations, coaches admitting to paying players and paying for motel rooms, bringing parents to campus illegally. You look at it and say, well, Tennessee, how does Tennessee get off? Where's the justice there? So I see both sides of it. I do think Tennessee did a really good job of navigating this situation. Donnie Plowman, the chancellor, deserves a lot of credit. Randy Boyd, the president, and then certainly Danny White. The way they just sort of all worked together and did everything and anything they could to make sure that they avoided a postseason ban.
Did you think there was a chance they could get a postseason ban recently?
Early on, but not as a process went. I was told by somebody pretty close to the situation and had been saying all along that once Tennessee went to Cincinnati for the hearings that they would not get one. I think it was really almost already worked out, but I think the Committee on Infractions wanted Tennessee to come, wanted them to appear before the Committee on Infractions, almost, pardon the phrase, but to get a little piece of their high, you know, and say, tisk, tisk, you better not do this again. But I think at that point it was pretty much done. They were not going to get the postseason ban. Would instead have to pay an $8 million fine, which is really closer to $9 million when you include all the other fees and fines, et cetera. And so, no, I didn't. At the end, I did not expect them to. And people say, I've had people say, well, do you think they should have? Not really. Not if the NCAA truly wants to protect coaches and players who are not part of the violations, then I don't know how you punish this group of Tennessee players and coaches.
No, I see that. And I tend to think that this new way of thinking is a better way of thinking because it is Jeremy Pruitt who caught the brunt of this. And if I'm a coach moving forward, I think of Pete Carroll, who was able just to kind of run off when things have gone so south at Southern Cal. And if I'm a coach now, I'm going to think twice before I'm doing these things because it hurts me.
Yeah, and that's the thinking, you know, that we want to punish the people who are actually committing the violations, the coaches, the assistant coaches, administrators that sort of are negligent and look the other way. That's who the NCAA wants to go after. I thought Jeremy Pruitt was going to get hit pretty hard, Dave. he honestly got hit a little bit harder than I thought he would. 6 years is a long time. He didn't get any time. And I'm not defending him. I mean, what happened there on his watch was sloppy. It was reckless. A lot of things, a lot of rules were broken. But I thought he might get some credit for time served because he hasn't coached college football for 2 years. His show cause goes through 2029, which really, for the most part, in college makes him unhireable. I've talked to a couple coaches here this week about Jeremy Pruitt. They've all said the same thing. He is a heck of a defensive football coach, but right now, with this show cause hanging over his head, and remember, he's got a chance to appeal. He and his attorneys could very well appeal. But right now, with this 6-year show cause, the year's suspension, if the NCAA would want him to come back, makes him pretty much unhireable at this point. Now, things change. If he were to win an appeal and the show cause were reduced, maybe the suspension is not as penal, then maybe somebody does bring him on, at least initially, as an analyst. But actually, having talked to some coaches about that here this week, I don't see that happening anytime soon.
As far as Josh Heupel, what's the next step in his program that needs to be addressed or developed? Because he's done an awful lot of things right, but I think even he would agree that some things such as maybe high school football recruiting could be a step better.
Yeah, we continue, and along those lines, continue to build depth. That's still the difference between Bama, and I know they beat Bama last year, but Bama and Georgia, the elite teams in college football, Ohio State, Michigan, is quality depth. And that's where you're right. You've got to really continue to bring in great recruiting classes in high school ranks. They seem to be recruiting very well. I give Josh and his staff credit. With all this NCAA cloud hanging over their head the last year or so, they've recruited at a really high clip. I think the NIL has helped them. They've been very aggressive in the realm of NIL. And that's, I think they've been able to attract players that probably they wouldn't have been able to get over the last few years because of that. Because every kid, I don't care. I love to hear this narrative out there. Well, no, I'm not taking any money, or no, this kid's not looking for money. They're all looking for money. They're all looking for their best deals in some form or fashion. Now, when I say all, there's always a few exceptions. But Tennessee's been really aggressive. Their collective Spire has been very aggressive. They've been front and center about what their mission is. But I think stacking another recruiting class or two on top of each other to build the kind of depth and create competition on the practice field. You were there in the late 90s or certainly the early 2000s when you'd go to practice, and Tennessee had all these guys that were really good football players that weren't starting. Mm-hmm. And you go to scrimmages, and sometimes it was hard to tell who were the second unit of defensive linemen versus the first unit. And that's the way it is at Georgia. I mean, Georgia keeps having umpteen guys drafted every year, and there's no fall off. I mean, their defense this year at Georgia will be really good again this year. So that's where Tennessee's got to get to. And I think the way you do that is you just keep stacking classes on top of each other. And also, and this is important, in this world, being able to fill in gaps and plug holes in the transfer portal. And Tennessee, to this point, has done a pretty nice job of that.
Yeah, I remember when Albert Haynesworth started becoming a thing, and I think we were asking, and you were there, kind of comparing him to John Henderson.
Right.
And as Philip Fulmer said, he's got that special sting. And I'm thinking, there's another guy that's special on the defensive line. That's the kind of depth Tennessee has.
Well, I mean, you look at the 98 and 99, 2000 teams, great football teams, 97. Certainly Peyton is the guy that faced that 97 team. But when I think of those teams, I look a little deeper, and I look at the front sevens on defense. I mean, you had Haynesworth, and he was later in 2001, but you had Leonard Little, you had Darwin Walker, you had Billy Ratliff, you had
Jeff Coleman.
You had Jeff Coleman, you had Al Wilson there at middle linebacker. Again, front seven to me, even especially then, but especially even more importantly now on defense is where you win and have a chance to play for championships. And those front sevens from 96, 97 to 2001, 2002 were exceptional. And you look at where those guys came from. They went out and recruited guys. Sean Ellis is another one. They recruited guys from North Carolina and South Carolina, from Georgia, from up along the Atlantic coast. They went out to Texas and got players. So they were able to sort of have long tentacles and get players in from all over the country. And I think that's what it's going to take for Josh and this program to get to a point where they're a top 5 team perennially. And I don't think they're too far off. I really don't. I think he's recruiting at a high clip. He's one of the best play callers, or certainly has one of the best schemes in college football. No one's been able to figure it out yet, going back to UCF. So you couple that with a really disruptive defense with the kind of defensive players who are NFL players. I mean, I think they're going to get there maybe sooner than anybody would have thought they would. I mean, did you expect them to win 11 games last year?
No.
I mean, I thought it would be, Butch Jones, as much flack as he gets, some of it I think is unfair. He won 9 games in back-to-back years. And I told somebody, when do you think the next time will be that Tennessee win 9 games in back-to-back years? And I thought it would be a long time. Well, now all of a sudden, here comes Josh Heupel, and they got a chance to do it this year.
Yeah. So what are their expectations for this year? Because when somebody asks me that, I don't want to be the raw guy. Yeah, I think you know me well enough. But I look at their schedule, and I think it's fair to expect 10 regular season wins. And I can't believe I'm saying that.
Well, last year everybody asked me, what to you is a sure sign of progress in year 2? And my answer was the same across the board. Whoever asked me is to beat one of the big 3, at least one. Because they were like 4-38 against Georgia, Alabama, and Florida over the last however many years. And I said, so to beat one of those teams, well, they beat 2 of them. They beat Florida and they beat Alabama. So I think this year, if they can beat 2 of them again, that would be an unbelievable response to last year, and then get to 10 wins. What's realistic? See, I think it's hard to put a number on it, because if they can continue to play at the level they did when they ended last season, then I think they're going to be a tough out for everybody. Even with Hendon getting hurt last year, they go to the bowl game and they beat Clemson. See, I think the key is everybody talks about Joe Milton. I think Joe Milton will be a really good quarterback. I'm not ready to step out there and say he's going to win the Heisman like some people are, but I think defensively, can they take the step forward defensively? If they do, then I agree with you. I think 10 wins is very realistic. But you know what, Dave? I think Texas A&M will be better than people think they are this year. Tennessee plays A&M. We know how good Georgia is. They have to play at Alabama. You think Alabama will be ready for that game?
Yeah.
They go to Florida. Now, I don't think Florida's going to be a great football team, but I still think playing down there early in the season is always hard. And here's one. I would watch Kentucky, too. Kentucky is at Kentucky. Tennessee's had their number. But they bring Liam Cohen back as their OC. They bring Leary in as their quarterback from NC State, who has a ton of snaps. That's a game that, even though Tennessee has really just sort of beat up on Kentucky, that's one I would watch, because I think Kentucky has a chance to be one of the bounce-back teams in the league. But, no, I like Tennessee's team. I like the culture that Josh has built. I like the fact that he is pretty much who he is all the time. He's not up or down. And I think his team has played that way. I think that's very reflective of the way his team has played the last 2 years. And I agree when he says the best is yet to come. I think unless something happens and they avoided this NCAA deal, had they gotten slammed with a year or 2 postseason ban, that could have stopped the train a little bit. But they've now are on the other side of that. I think they got a chance to get back to where Tennessee was in the 90s, in the early 2000s under Philip Fulmer, and that's being what I would call an upper echelon, top 3, top 4, top 5 SEC program.
Great stuff. He's Chris Low, ESPN senior writer. I'm Dave Hooker. This has been a presentation of Off the Hook Sports.